of the panel is 9 years after 9/11, are we safer? And nowhere could this panel be more appropriate than in this city, which has seen the most atrocious terrorist attack in modern history on September 11, 2001. Of course, since then, wars have been fought, billions of dollars have been spent to make America safer. But how successful have these efforts been? And are we safer now? And we've brought together an extremely interesting and articulate panel to discuss this question. I'll briefly mention who they are. To my right, immediate right, Fran Townsend, former Homeland Security Advisor under President George W. Bush. Then Steve Clements, a senior fellow at the New America Foundation. Ambassador Kofor Black, former director of the CIA's Counterterrorism Center, and of course, former counterterrorism ambassador at the State Department. And then Arif Ali Khan, Assistant Secretary for Policy Development at the Department of Homeland Security. And indeed, I want to start the session by asking each of the panelists the question of the panel, namely whether they think as to whether we are safer now than we were. Fran.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you. It's really a privilege to be here and be a part of the conference. Let me simply say, yes, I think we're safer, but there's always something that comes after that but. Yes, of course we're safer, but as a result of that, we are in some ways the victim of our own success. I think it is fair to say that, one, as a result of our success and making the country safer, there's a certain complacency among the American people. There are those who believe that we now, 9 years after the tragedy of September the 11th, that the threat has dissipated because we haven't been attacked again. When you look at just this year, I think the number is more than 25 individuals here inside the United States have been arrested in relationship to a terrorism investigation. That threat remains very real, and so I worry about complacency. And the second piece to that is I worry about the emerging threat. As a result of many of the successes both here at home and around the world that we've enjoyed, not just the United States, but frankly with our partners as we combat terrorism, the threat itself has morphed. And the manifestation of that here is what we call the homegrown threat. There are different rules that apply inside the United States for our law enforcement and intelligence agencies and what they're able to do. It's a challenge. I would say to you that I think critically there are three pieces to confronting that most immediate threat of homegrown terrorism. One is we need to go back and re-strengthen our alliances with our foreign intelligence services and allies around the world, because after all, we need to be able to exchange real-time information with them of the kinds of information that will help us target homegrown terrorism, whether that's communications or travel or associations with people in foreign countries. Second, and really challenging for the federal government, is strengthening our relationship with our state and local partners. Not every city in the United States has got the first-class local police department that New Yorkers enjoy. The NYPD has extraordinary capability that not all local police departments have, but even the NYPD continues to have concerns about things like information sharing, the flow of intelligence, and frankly, the feds have concerns about getting intelligence from the locals on the street, the people, the cops walking the beat, who are likely to come have first contact with an individual here in this country who intends to do us harm. And so we have to strengthen those relationships so that information flow is optimized. And then lastly, it goes back to my first concern about complacency, and that is energizing the American people to understand this is not asking folks to invade the privacy of others, but it's asking individuals to take responsibility and understand that their government cannot be effective combating terrorism without not only the support, but the active involvement of the American people. And I worry about that. Probably the best example of active involvement was here in New York City at the Times Square attack, where the See It, Say It campaign actually had a success when a street vendor notified a local policeman. But those are the sorts of things, we have pockets of excellence around the country, but there's not been a national movement to engage the American people on why it's so important for them to be actively involved.
Thank you. Steve, are we safer?
Thank you. Fran is a good friend, so she'll know I'm going to take a slightly different view. My view is that America is substantially far less safe today and far less safe in the sense that we've simultaneously convinced Americans, I'm from Salina, Kansas, their local mall may be less vulnerable to an Al-Qaeda or other kind of terrorist attack. But on the big picture, the United States as a whole, in terms of its strategic interests, has seen an incredible diminishment in its ability to sculpt global affairs in a way that are conducive to our core interests. And that when you look at 9/11, 9/11 to some degree was both a punctuation point in history, in which I think you have now substantial discontinuity from the kind of world we were in to where we're in today. And I tell people it's kind of like we lived in a gravity-less environment before, where if you went to Indonesia or India or Malaysia or Japan, Germany, pick any other nation in the world, and they were always amazed by the absence of limits on the United States, that we had no bounds on our military power, our economic power, our ability to innovate. And now they see a nation that is beset by limits and constraints and bounded on all sorts of fronts. You know, superpowers run more by mystique than by applications of power. And if you look at the military side, you look at economic, you look at the moral dimensions of leadership in the world, I'd say that 9/11 created the conditions under which all three of those areas of global performance have been severely challenged and have punctured America's mystique. And I think to some degree, our real challenge today is to figure out how to turn that around and how to reinvent America's capacity to create, to change the way global gravity works, and to weigh in the big things. That is what I think average Americans need to weigh their security in a bit more. Yes, we've created the Department of Homeland Security. Yes, we've created capacity to look at certain core threats, but we are missing the much larger picture, I think, that when it comes to economic and military tracks that I think the United States has got to get back on to demonstrate a capacity to sculpt the global system. That is where we have now substantially less, and I think we've, at our peril, have made some very, very bad policy choices.
Thank you. Ambassador Black, are we safer?
Very often, when we discuss things like this, they can sort of veer off depending on people's own personal orientation and background and how they see major security issues. First of all, I would say, who's the we? If we're talking the United States, my answer would be yes. There are some other communities in the world where the answer would be no. The longer we talk and introduce many other aspects to this basic question of are we safer from terrorism, the more complicated it can be. I just draw on my experience, and you know, you can question or criticize, but since I was there, I'll kind of hold to my story. Before 9/11, it was very difficult for Americans, even in leadership positions, to accept and validate the actual threat that was coming at us. We'd come out of the Cold War, we're used to various aspects of nuclear annihilation, balance of power, things like that. And this transition from that and sort of lefty terrorism, you know, Carlos the Jackal, Baader-Meinhof, was a hard transition to make. And before 9/11, I can tell you that, as an example, you know, the best military in the world, the United States military, they didn't do counterterrorism, as stated by the chairman of Joint Chiefs in the 9/11 committee. They didn't do counterterrorism. Other aspects of the United States government really were not harnessed in that. So the answer, I think, at an elementary level has to be certainly yes. After 9/11, there's obviously great appreciation, not only in the government, your elected representatives, as well as in the communities at large. So there is an appreciation. Out of this tremendous amount of resources were devoted, we can talk about sustainability in the future and how much is enough and where do we want to spend our money. That's one question. We established organizations like Department of Homeland Security. You may like it. My colleague will tell you you should. It may be seen to be expensive or too big or too small, whatever you like. We can have these kinds of discussions, but basically, I think you can say that, yep, we're safer than we were before, because there was really a fundamental lack of appreciation of the threat. Now there certainly is, or there certainly was, and we have gone through time. There have been political decisions that have been made as we've gone along. You know, we had a discussion here and raised of hands. Some people think, you know, invading Iraq was good, others say bad. Afghanistan, same thing, we're looking at a strategy. But I think for the United States and her allies, I think the trend has been favorable.